our February 26, 2025 Board of Douglas County Commissioners 5:30 business meeting. Paper copies of our agenda are available for those who are here in person, and the full packet is available on our website. Reviewing our agenda, first we will start with the consent agenda. There are 2 items on our consent agenda. After the consent agenda, we will have general public comment. We welcome general public comment for addressing issues that are not on today's agenda, but otherwise related to county business. Given our limited time and the need to have orderly and efficient meetings, we apply certain rules regarding public comments. We'll do our best to enforce these rules consistently and without regard to the point of view expressed by the speaker. Here are those rules. 1, each speaker will be limited to a total of 3 minutes of speaking time. However, we will accept public comment of any length in writing. 2, individual speakers may not donate unused time to other speakers. 3, all comments must address topics within the jurisdiction of the County Commission. And 4, we reserve the right to mute or remove any speaker whose comments are threatening, aggressively hostile, or belligerent. Campaigning for public office during public comment period is not allowed. Please give your full name and address for our meeting minutes and address your comments to the commission. Please also know that comments received by the commission during our meetings do not necessarily represent the views of the Douglas County government, but we value your input. We don't usually respond to general public comments on the spot, but if you leave your contact information with county staff, we'll try and get your specific questions answered. After that, we'll move to our regular agenda. There are 4 items on the regular agenda. Our first item is a project overview and authorization of financing for the JLE and the public safety building. We're going to talk about some changes to the Bert Nash budget allocation for 2025. And then we have one overview and one update, one from eCommunities, and then an update from Little Government Relations, who works at the state level for us. Each action item will hear from staff or the applicant, followed by questions from the commission, and then open the mic up for public comment on relevant items. Once public comment is closed, we'll bring it up to the commission for further discussion and vote if appropriate. Lastly, a recording of this meeting will be available on the county's YouTube page and website. With that, commissioners, is there any item on the consent agenda you'd like to have removed for further discussion? Anyone in the public like to remove an item from the consent agenda? Online, Sarah? Seeing none, commissioners, I'd take a motion on the consent agenda.
This is Gene Dorsey. I move that we approve items 1.1 and 1.2 on the consent agenda.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
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 Passes 5-0. We'll move on to general public comment. Is there anyone here at the courthouse who'd like to provide general public comment? Step up on the podium there. I don't see a sign-up sheet, so make sure you say your name and address. That'd be helpful to us for our meeting minutes.
My name is John Eames, Lawrence, Kansas. Just a couple of quick comments, actually, in regard to the NGO that was just here prior in the business meeting. I did want to follow up on a couple of questions the commissioners asked. One of them was who is the population that is served? I think that's a very good question. I think that it's not answered in the briefing material that's provided. It's not normally answered. I heard the comment about not revealing personal information. That's fine. But I think some demographics, and he kind of touched on it, but I think it should be a lot more formal. So, are they native to Douglas County? Are they native to Lawrence? Are they U.S. citizens or not? These statistics of who they serve should be provided on a regular basis and made available to the public. And also, just as a good steward, you should know that also. So I appreciated your question. Another question that was asked is had to do with, sorry, I got to look at my notes here, metrics. You just barely mentioned metrics. There's a number of they call impacts, value adds in their briefing on page 8, I believe. And they list them, and they're all people oriented, which they should be, but there's no numerics. Are they successful? How many families did they put back together? How many kids did they get back in school? How many drug addicts did they get off? And maybe what kind of drugs? I mean, I'm sure that they will be effective in coming up with them. But again, as good stewards of taxpayer money, you should see that as a running quarterly, half year, full year, whatever, so that you can track that your money that you donated with 6 million in the briefing package is being put to effective use. So that has to do with the first set. Last time I was here, I mentioned that you needed some industry or commercialization to tax other than just taxpayers. The response that I got was, well, it's a chicken and egg problem, and we don't, we can't just bring in industry without anybody living here. We can't build houses without any industry. Well, it didn't take me long to come across, and I'm sure there's many, but you might take a look at Falls City, Nebraska, who is getting regularly awarded every year for the last 4 years. Excuse me, for the last 4 years. They're solving that problem simultaneously. And what a city can do, a county can do. And again, that's Falls City, Nebraska. They got awarded the Economic Development Certified Community for the 4th time.
Thank you, John.
I
That's
can
3
find you
minutes.
more if you like.
Yeah.
Okay, that's enough.
Any other public comment? Anyone online, Sarah? Okay. We'll close public comment and we'll move on to our regular agenda item, and we'll start with a project overview and authorization of bond financing to pay the cost of construction, furnishing and equipping renovations and remodeling of, and in addition to, this is a really long statement here, the county's judicial and law enforcement center and the new county's public safety facility and all the improvements related thereto.
Thank you, commissioners. Yeah, it is a long statement because this is the kind of statement prepared by bond counsel. And I'd like to introduce Garth Herman with Gilmore and Bell and Ben Hart with Baker Tilly, who are going to help walk commissioners through the process used to issue bonds for the projects that we approved late last year. And so Garth, I'll turn it over to you. You have to push the
Garth,
little
don't
button,
forget to
Garth.
push the button.
Yeah, there you go.
There's 2 things I love when Baker Tilly comes. I get to say words like there too and address someone named Garth.
Yeah, right there you go. All right.
You're up.
Thank you very much for having us. As Sarah mentioned, I'm Garth Herman with Gilmore and Bell, the county's bond counsel. Ben Hart with Baker
So
Tilly.
you might need to pick that mic up and
the
get it close to you.
county's-
Thanks.
I'll just do this. The county's financial advisor. The direct item before you, as you mentioned, relates to a project authorization for the specific project. Now, the county has previously, authorized entering into the contract, related to these projects. What this resolution does for you today, though, is kind of the first step under state law. So under state law, there's kind of 3 different steps that the county has to do in order to actually issue bonds to pay all or a portion of the cost of this project. The first step is to find the specific statutes that apply to this type of project and go through the procedures that those statutes require the county enter into and perform. For this particular type of project, that procedure is to adopt a resolution. So the background on this is back in 1994, Douglas County had a sales tax election that authorized the imposition of a 1% countywide retailer sales tax. The revenue from that sales tax could be used to pay for governmental purposes at the discretion of the county, including the payment of debt service on any sales tax and/or general obligation bonds that you issue for those projects. Pursuant to that authority over the years, the county has gone through a similar process to authorize bonds for a variety of different county public building projects. And so this is what this resolution before you does right now, is it recites the authority from that 1994 sales tax election, as well as from the sales tax election statutes. It provides that the only other outstanding series of bonds that are payable from that sales tax are your 2020-B bonds, which are actually a refunding bond issue for some prior projects, and that it authorizes the issuance of bonds in an amount at the discretion of the county to pay all or a portion of the costs of the estimated $82 million for that project. So with this action today, you're not actually setting the amounts of those bonds. It simply is giving you the authority to issue the amount of bonds that you need to pay for those costs. I know that the county anticipates providing a sizable amount of county funds towards that project. So even though that number is still in flux, that still is okay. This simply gives you the authority to issue bonds in the amount that you need, and which will work within the cash flows of your sales tax election. After the adoption of this resolution, there's two more steps for formal county action. The next step will be what we call a sale resolution, where that will actually authorize the sale of these general obligation bonds. Ben will talk a little bit more about the actual sale procedure, but in essence, it will be a public auction. There will be a date set. Investment banks who want to buy the county's bonds will submit a bid, and the county, based on the best interest rate, will award the sale of those bonds. So that second resolution authorizes that sale to occur. The third and final action for the county commission relates to the adoption of a bond resolution. So this happens after the sale. The bond resolution sets forth the final repayment terms, interest rates, principal amounts, when it can be prepaid, how it will be paid, what the source of the funds will be used to finance that project. That's the bond resolution. It occurs after the sale, roughly 2 to 3 weeks after that bond resolution is adopted. That is when the actual closing of the bond issue occurs. That is when the bonds are turned over to the investment bank who purchased them. In exchange, that investment bank actually wires the purchase price to the county's bank account. At that point, you can use that money to pay the costs. So I know that was a lot, kind of like the wording that I gave you to bring up this item. So I'll pause at this point for any questions. And if there's none for me, then I will turn it over to Ben, and he can kind of walk through his part of the process as well.
Thank you. Any questions, commissioners?
I have some, but I think they're for Ben.
I like those questions.
Yeah, hi, Ben Hart with Baker Tilly. So he gets to do the fun part. He gets to put all the documents together, and then we just execute everything he says to do, we do. So what the city will do, or the county will do, go through a rating agency rating call, much like you do on a personal basis. You've got a rating score, a little more complicated, obviously, for a public entity. But Sarah and her team will go through that rating conference call. You guys, Douglas County's got a good rating, a really high rating. We expect to get that language back and not a whole lot of changes from last year with the strength of what the county's got going on. With that, we'll apply that credit score, if you will, to the top of what's called an official statement that we'll put together and put out on the market. And that's basically just tells everything about the county, everything about the bonds to any of the investors. On sale day is May 9th. We'll put a little Teams meeting together. And what happens is we dial into one website. At this point, it's been a week that we've been marketing the bonds. It's all out there for the investors to look at. Investors throughout the country will focus on certain areas of the United States. There are a set of investment banks that are notorious for bidding on large deals in Kansas, Missouri, the middle of the United States. We expect to see them here. About a month ago, we saw 9 different banks with 9 different bids on a bond issue. The more bids, obviously, the better the price. At the time, it was around 4%. What we expected, we got 3.83. The sale, if it happens at 10 o'clock, we'll see bids get submitted and pulled out. We won't be able to see the bids until the clock turns over and it's time to open them. But we'll see banks enter a bid, pull it out, enter a bid. Another one comes up and enter a bid. So they're competing for your investment, so they can buy that investment. And we like to see that because that'll bring down that interest cost. And like I said, about a month ago, it was around 3.83%, and that was an equivalent actual rating that you guys have as well. So after that's done, we'll bring all the information back to you, go through what the sale looked like, who bid on it, what some of the comments were on the rating call, the actual document gets published. When you see that document, it's a good summary for, or at least a financial summary for how the county's operating. Both management, the cash balances, everything that they look at is positive. Any kind of weaknesses, if there are, they'll point those out, usually mitigating factors, especially when you get a AA plus anyway. It's a high rating. We'll bring all that back and kind of go through it on the evening of the sale. So you'll see everything, 6 hours after it actually happens. We'll ask for your approval. Once we get that approval, our office then coordinates everything with the investment bank that is awarded that investment. Any questions for me?
Well, my first question is for Sarah. I think the state limits us to borrowing so much money based on the total property valuation.
This is a sales tax backed.
Oh, so this doesn't count
Yes,
against that?
right, correct.
Okay,
Because we had these bonds will be paid for with the sales tax, 1 cent countywide sales tax, which was authorized by the voters in 1996 and authorized the county to issue debt from those proceeds.
thanks. My question for you, Ben, is I know nothing's set in stone till you bid, but what would be the interest rate difference between a AAA and a AA plus?
We don't see a huge difference in the interest rates right now between the two. The activity in the market right now, we see as many bidders on a AA plus as we do on a AAA. And as you may or may not know, that's just AA plus is just a half a step below the AAA. Financially, you're not going to recognize a difference in the interest cost. Now, if we were going out on a private market and not bidding this in an auction, we might be able to see something. Missouri does a lot of that. It's not as competitive as what you guys go through in Kansas.
Thanks.
I had some other questions. So it's mentioned that we won't know until that step 3, like what the terms are of the bonds in terms of if there's any penalty for paying back early. How does that get set? And is that part of that auction process, or do we have a say in it?
That's a really good question. We actually build that into the process. So the official statement we actually use, we'll go to the county, we'll go through that official statement. In that official statement, it'll actually have what the county's desire for a callback feature is what that is, the prepayment penalty, in other words. It'll be anywhere from 8 to 10 years, depending on where that market's at. We'll know that well in advance, and so will the county. That's one of the key features of that sale. So we have to really talk about that before we ever get there. So the county will know that, and the county administration will definitely know that. Right now, we're using 8 years to give for a callback feature. And for those that don't know, callback feature just means you can't prepay those bonds until that time period. Then you can refund them, pay them off, do whatever you want to.
And otherwise, what's the length of term typically for these bond sales?
Yeah, typically it's around a 20-year maturity on a bond issue.
Thanks.
Any other questions, Commissioners?
Just a clarification. So you're saying generally it would be a 20-year bond, but after 8 years or whatever is negotiated, those bonds could be paid off early if we had the money.
Right. If sales tax was doing a lot better than what we had forecasted and the county has that desire, the county administration has the ability to start prepaying a lot of that the interest and the principal in the out years where it may be 5% interest rate, you start buying that down. At the same time, not that it would happen a few years ago when interest rates went to like 0.1%, if that happens again, at that point, you're going to refund everything you got that you can and get that interest rate low. Yeah.
You mentioned the word penalty, so I just want to check, are there any prepayment penalties if the county determines they would like to pay it off early?
No, by terms, you can't pay anything off ahead of that call date. So it's just not a possibility. So really, there's no penalty per se. You just can't do it prior to the call date. Yeah. Good question.
Okay. Anything else, gentlemen, before we open it up for public comment? Okay. Is there anyone here who'd like to provide public comment on this item? Anyone online, Sarah? Okay, we'll close public comment and bring it up to the commission for further questions, comments, and maybe a motion.
I had one question, not sure who it's to. I'll ask Sarah. When will we know the exact amount of the bond amount?
I'm going to continue just to work with bond counsel and financial advisor to look at where we are from a cash position, see if we can put some additional cash towards it. Really want to just weigh like what advantages is it giving us. And so I'm going to be doing over that over the next couple of weeks, and then we'll bring it back to commissioners before the end of March when we have to finalize.
And then is the budget for the project pretty firm?
It's absolutely firm. We
Okay.
signed a construction contract and a guaranteed maximum price in December.
Thanks.
Make a motion if you're ready.
Sure.
I move that we approve Resolution 25-13, authorizing the construction of the capital improvement projects, Douglas County, Kansas, and providing for the payments of the costs thereof.
Second.
Moved in second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Thank you.
Thank you both, gentlemen. Appreciate it.
Very much. And on a side note, this is my first time here since you've done the renovations. They look amazing. So
Great. Yeah, we like them too. Enjoying those cushion chairs, are you? All right, we'll go to our second agenda item, which is for Bert Nash's fiscal year 2025 budget allocation. Jill?
Good evening, Commissioners. Jill Joliker, Assistant County Administrator. My colleague Bob Transky is here as well to answer any questions about this particular item. We work together on a lot of projects, and this is certainly one of them. What we're asking for you today, I outlined this in the AIR, but the 2024 and 2025 budget for Bert Nash included a provision for $200,000 in programmatic support for the Assertive Community Treatment Program Act. Over the course of the first year of launching that program, county staff has been closely monitoring that program and how it's been utilized through some different variations, ups and downs. And we've had, as Patrick mentioned in the study session, county staff have a lot of conversations throughout the year. Because that program has not quite met the performance expectations that the county had expected, in really close consultation with Bert Nash over the course of the past few months, honestly, we've been talking about shifting some of that money into other areas where we know we have progress, where we know there's action, where we know we at times we need capacity. So one of those areas that we're proposing is to reallocate on a one-time basis $46,000 of that designated $200,000 to fill a projected budget shortfall that Bert Nash has projected for a position on the City of Lawrence-led homelessness response team. That position, as I outlined in the AIR, is partially funded by a emergency solutions grant, which is administered by the state of Kansas, Kansas Housing Resources Corporation, who makes an allocation to the City of Lawrence to do their own mini grant program. So it's a little complicated. So the City of Lawrence team, Bert Nash has historically applied for the ESG funding for the position that has been working with this homeless response team. They're no longer able to fund their portion of that position. So the city communicated with, Bert Nash communicated with the city that they were going to experience this budget shortfall, and that particular position would have to be let go. So that was a real concern to our colleagues with the homelessness response team that Bob and I work pretty often with, along with a lot of other partners. As I outlined in the AIR, we think it's an important position to maintain. So the outlined funding, again, it's proposed to be one time for the remainder of this year. So to get through the grant period that Bert Nash is contracted under, it's $27,000. And then that position will transition over to the city, to be a City of Lawrence position shortly after the end of June. And the rest of that funding will go to the City of Lawrence. And then the City of Lawrence already feels very confident that they'll be able to include funding in their 2026 budget to fully fund that position into the future. So again, this is one-time funding for us coming to the table of making that homelessness response team whole. And just a fun reminder that the homelessness response team is representative of one of our core goals and a place for everyone. And that was to stand up a multidisciplinary homelessness response team. That team has been incredibly successful over the last few months that it's been in action. And yeah, with that, I'm happy to stand for questions. And again, Bob's here if there's any specifics about the reallocation of funding.
I had a question. You said till June, an employee will be in the ACT team and then they'll transition.
No, so till June. So this position is currently working as a Bert Nash employee. They're going to stay a Bert Nash employee until the end of June, working on the homelessness response team through the end of this grant that Bert Nash is currently the grant holder. And what I didn't say, and I think I said in the AIR, is the current grant term ends in June. The City of Lawrence intends to apply for the next grant term, which will start July 1, and the funding for that position will shift to the City of Lawrence, and that staff member will shift from being a Bert Nash employee working on the homelessness response team to becoming a City of Lawrence employee working on the homelessness response team.
That's the same person.
Correct.
Not two different people.
Correct. And this person is not working on the ACT team currently.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Sure.
So Jill, the ESG grant that you were talking about that Bert Nash currently holds and the City of Lawrence is planning to apply for so that there's not a gap between them. Was that
Yes.
a discussion between those two entities about who would apply for it or any reason why Bert Nash decided not to?
Bert Nash is not going to apply because they don't have the matching funds that they need for that position to sustain it. The City of Lawrence, it's a priority to them. So they have clearly communicated with Matthew Falk, who oversees that part of the team, that's their intent to apply for it.
Okay, I appreciate that clarification.
So City of Lawrence, moving forward, they will apply for the grant. And then they will have matching funds for the grant application.
Mhm.
And then the FTE position is completely funded by the grant and the matching funds?
It's funded by, yes, matching funds from the City of Lawrence and the ESG grant.
Okay. And then moving into 2026, how is the team assuring that the City of Lawrence, with their budget shortfall, will be able to ensure that that position is still funded?
Right. The Misty Bosch Hastings, the Homelessness Initiatives Homelessness Solutions Director, has identified this position already with her in her existing budget. And specifically, she knows that there are going to be funds freed up in her budget. If you follow the conversation with the Lawrence Community Shelter Funding Agreement, the funding for 2026 is going to be stepped down from the City of Lawrence, which is going to open up more money for other homelessness solutions division initiatives. This is one of the spots that she intends to fund.
Thank you.
Sure.
So we had a work session earlier, and on one of the slides, it listed ACT as 462,000 as a revenue gap. And now we're taking money from that fund. Can you walk me through the logic on that?
Yep. Commissioners, 2 years ago, when the assertive community treatment team was coming online at Bert Nash, we redirected some of those funds to the tune of $200,000 toward that project. As I said during the study session, an assertive community treatment team is a requirement of CCBHC, but an interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary team focused on with a low caseload on this model has been a priority of our partners for several years. That project has, I would say, had difficulty coming online and also in its stability. And as administration looked at some of the performance metrics over the last 2 years. We have concerns about the number of people that are being served. We have concerns about the way in which the project itself is being staffed, the amount of turnover on that staff, lack of program management leadership, all concerns that can happen with a new project. But we've raised those concerns with Bert Nash, and given the fact that it's a requirement of CCBHC and an expectation of KDADS, the question is, does it make sense long-term for the county to be supporting that program in this way? And we think we have some agreement with Bert Nash that they think maybe no. So that creates some opportunity here as we go through some transition and iteration to make sure that we're still funding that street outreach work, that multidisciplinary team approach, which is having a lot of success and is now being supported pretty robustly by the city, if that makes sense. I don't know the answer to the question on the $445,000 gap. What I know before CCBHC is that assertive community treatment is a program that's been around for 30 years. It's a pretty simple model. It's 10 people serving 100 people with a 10-to-1 caseload. Traditionally, there's a nurse on the team, there's an employment specialist on the team, there's a psychiatrist on the team. When we started working on this 6 years ago, it cost about $1 million to stand up an ACT team. So these costs are different than what we expected, and I think what Bert Nash expected as well. So what you need to know is that in June of this year, we placed a pause on that $200,000. So in 2024, Bert Nash invoiced the county for $120,000 out of the $200,000. And so those dollars were not spent. And in the first 2 months of the year, the dollars for ACT also have not been spent. The funding is on pause until we can work through what some of the expectations would be, or if Bert Nash even wants to continue with county dollars going to ACT, given some of the other priorities that we have. So I think this is a situation or a case where as we bring these programs online, we are learning that some things go the way that we anticipated and projected, and then other needs come up, and we have been adjusting and iterating and making some transitions as we go. This is a good example of that.
Of the 200,000 that was allocated for that project within the 2025 budget from the county, proposing to move 46,000, so the additional 154,000, is that still anticipated to be county dollars that are supporting that program, similar to what was used in 2024?
Yes, we still don't have a signed agreement from Bert Nash for the 2024 service agreement, for the 2025 service agreement. So we made this adjustment in the exhibits that reflect that. And that agreement will be signed anytime now.
Any other questions, commissioners?
Trying to understand the ACT. Funding will be reduced, but you still have to have it. Will the number of employees involved be reduced, or how does that work?
So, an assertive community treatment team has fidelity standards and staff to client ratios and the mix of skills within the multidisciplinary team. So that is, I think, an issue that Bert Nash is working through as they try to stand up and stabilize an assertive community treatment team. I will also say that assertive community treatment is a difficult model to bring online. Bert Nash was one of the first assertive community treatment teams in the state of Kansas, and all of the community mental health centers are having trouble or are being challenged to bring this model online. Bert Nash is not in a unique situation. However, there were expectations in terms of the number of clients, with high complex needs that would be served. And given some of the circumstances Bert Nash has faced with the ACT team, those targets have not been realized yet. Emphasis on yet.
So I imagine that's one of those conversations that Bert Nash is having with the state over something that they're requiring and yet something they're not funding fully, and then the difficulties matching that
Yeah, there are a lot of conversations with these pieces of a crisis response system, which we've brought online, brought all the components online. It's a process.
Any other questions, commissioners? Okay, we'll open it up for public comment. Any public comment on this item? Anyone online, Sarah? Okay, back to the commission for more questions, comments, or motions.
I don't have any other questions, so I'll just make a comment and then move on to a motion. Unless any of my fellow commissioners want to turn on their mic also. I just want to appreciate our staff's work in really being thoughtful and I suppose nimble is an appropriate word about how it is, through recent years, this commission and the staff of Douglas County have been working hard to really think through and be purposeful about service agreements and the relationships that we have both in funding and community development work in all the forms that it takes and service strengthening. And so I think this is just a really good example, and there's been a couple of them, honestly, in the last couple of years of where, as you were describing, Bob, something that we anticipated a certain picture for, and sort of all the different ingredients that were going to be needed to bring something online and try and execute it in a way that we envisioned. It just doesn't always quite pan out that way. And so I just want to highlight that I appreciate that skill in our staff, and that's something that I see regularly. Our staff is really maintaining an eye for and monitoring sort of the totality of circumstances with all the partners and all the services that this commission and this organization has prioritized, and this community is so deeply invested in. And this is relatively small potatoes in dollar amounts in terms of what we can do to sort of shift dollars from one place to another that is related and that is executing services to meet needs in our community. And that doesn't happen without paying close attention and to what is happening on the ground, and to having those regular conversations and communication amongst partners about how's it really playing out in reality? Is it matching the picture we had and that we envisioned? Is it not? How do we adjust along the way? It's really smart, a way to work, I think, and it will save us more money down the road, inevitably, as one outcome. And more importantly, it is indicative to me that there's a real eye towards paying attention to what community needs are not being met, and also recognizing and noticing where they are being met and where we can contribute to that capacity. So being able to identify that the HRT team that has been stood up and that has been functioning is going really well, and there's a potential loss or gap that presented itself in that. And because of your guys's careful attention to sort of the totality of circumstances, you're able to figure out that this is a nimble one-time option to meet the need, and shift the resources where it is necessary, and not let it snowball. So I just appreciate that.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I just want to say one other thing, which is I think Burt Nash and the county are very proud of the amount of data, the amount of metrics that we look at, and that because of the work we've done together in that space with the IT team at Burt Nash, with leadership at Burt Nash, we are able to look at, and I will share with you the specific metrics around assertive community treatment to give you a sense of what we look at, how we're looking at it, because that's what's led to these types of conversations back and forth about what makes the most sense when we think about the community's investment, the county's responsibility, and the expectations that an agency like Bert Nash is really in the middle of. There are expectations that KDADS has, there are fidelity standards that SAMHSA has, there are needs that the county has. And so when you are an agency in the middle of that, you are stretched in different directions. And our partner has not been afraid of or shied away from those tough conversations because we've agreed on, let's look at these grids, let's follow these metrics, and let's ask questions when something is not hitting the target or the expectation that's in a fidelity standard.
So I just would have one more comment before a motion maybe comes forward. And I just want to double down on Commissioner Reed and the comments about the attention that staff is paying to make sure that the investments we are making are working the way that is intended. I think we're trying to do that with all community partners, and it's good to know it's working. And this is not the first time that you've come back to us and say we need to make an adjustment. That being said, I'm making notes of how we are portraying a budget crisis on a program that we are struggling with. And so I think that's what I'm hoping staff will continue to work on with Bert Nash to understand what is the actual cost. I think we need to think a little bit about the capacity we have to do all the work that we want to do. And that sometimes we can create programs, but we can't actually do them. And so that's fine to be aspirational. But when we're assessing tax dollars based on those aspirations, that we have to make sure that we can actually do what we say we're going to do.
Yeah.
And then I'd ask you, Bob, if you can visit with John, because he made some comments earlier about metrics, and we have had presentations from Bert Nash that give us very detailed metrics on their performance levels, maybe not to quite the level that our public comment asked for, but some very good data that I think really recognizes the good work that Bert Nash is doing with the tax dollars that are part of the service agreement that we have with them. So.
And just one other request that I will make you aware of that we have asked for on several occasions is, given what actually happened in 2024, we would like to see what the actual costs of the ACT program were in 2024 based on the staffing that was delivered, the number of clients that were served. So I'm hoping that we will have that to look at also as we continue to talk about what happens for the rest of 2025 and/or in 26.
And I'm just piggybacking on that, and just the trend that we have pulled back from just either paying for the health insurance costs or paying for just uninsured costs, and instead moving that conversation to funding specific programs through Bert Nash and all of our partners, like being really specific about what county tax dollars are expected to gain from those services. That's been a tremendous shift. It's a lot of work on staff. It's also just a lot of accountability that I think has been really important that this board's been working on for the last several years.
One other last thing that I would say is we've also, as we've been doing this work, tried to catalyze things and also support things as they come online, which may or may not require a long-term sustained funding commitment. We've supported things so that they could get started. 988 and the crisis line is an example of that. And so there is going to need to be some continued adjustments, conversations, looking at these metrics, because we have to build a 24/7 crisis system that is right-sized for this community and that is sustainable with the very fixed resource that the community gave us to operate with the behavioral health sales tax, which is a tremendous resource if we don't spend it all at one time.
There's no other comments. I think Commissioner Reed, you were offering to make a motion here.
Ready. I move to approve the reallocation of $46,000 from the Assertive Community Treatment Program included in the Bert Nash Community Mental Health Center fiscal year 2025 budget to provide one-time funding to support personnel staffing costs for the City of Lawrence homelessness response team.
Commissioner Kelly, second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 5-0. Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Bob. Appreciate your work on that. Give Jill a second to change gears here. And we move on to our next item, which is a entrepreneurship community, or what we call sometimes our e-community program overview and update.
Good evening, Commissioners. Happy to have an opportunity to provide you all with an overview and an update of our e-community program for Douglas County and the city of Lawrence. I know with two new commissioners, it's a nice opportunity to be able to give you an overview of what is the e-community program, give you a sense of what it's been doing in the past and where we're headed in the future. And for our three other commissioners, I think you have good awareness of that, but I don't think we've done an update on e-community in a good amount of time. So our timing's really, it's really clutch. So before I have some guests that are going to help me through this presentation, but I just quickly want to, I put this into the AIR, that since 2012, Douglas County has been partnering with Network Kansas, which is a statewide not-for-profit organization. You're going to hear from their director here in just a minute, to establish a locally administered loan fund that assists entrepreneurs with capital, creates the connectivity to the resources that are available, and then assist entrepreneurs and small businesses in initiating the activities that create entrepreneurial activities and development. And we participate in statewide partnerships with other e-communities that are often facilitated by Network Kansas and other organizations like the Small Business Development Center, for one. Today, we're one of 75 e-communities across the state. The Lawrence Chamber began its partnership as being an agency that hosts the Lawrence Metro, or it's the Lawrence Urban Community, sorry. Lawrence Urban Community, I think, I have it in my notes somewhere. You're going to hear exact year in one of my slides of when the Lawrence Urban Community became an e-community, 2015. 2015. It's in a later slide here, but there's two distinct e-communities. You're going to hear a little bit about what distinguishes them in today's presentation. But for now, I want to invite Eric up to talk about the e-community program.
There. Thank you, Jill. Good evening, Commissioners. My name's Eric Peterson. I'm the president and the COO of Network Kansas. And I think my role here this evening is to very briefly give a little bit of history, a little bit of background, and a little bit of overview of the framework that we do at Network Kansas that allows the Douglas County and the Lawrence urban e-community to execute. And then I'll clear the field and let the ones that actually do the work take the credit, because I can tell you before I start that there are 75 communities we partner with. And in all the ways that we evaluate partnerships at Network Kansas, this is a top 5 group. And I think you'll enjoy the update. And those of you that are veterans have had a chance to hear these for years. So I'll just give a little bit of update about Network Kansas. I was hired, myself and another gentleman were hired in 2 months. 2 months from now, it will be 20 years since we were hired to open this organization. It was founded by the state as the Kansas Center for Entrepreneurship. And we were on the campus of Wichita State to begin with, and we're now 30 people. Roughly half of them are located where I'm at in Andover, Kansas, and the other half are dispersed around the state, because part and parcel to everything we do, it's relationships, and it's relationships with on the ground chambers, economic development professionals, et cetera. So we try our very best to be present as often as possible. So that's why half our staff works from their home in various regions of the state. When myself and Steve were hired, we were given 2 quick marching orders, or 2 marching orders, and I'm going to try and be quick. The first was to create a one-stop shop, a referral center where entrepreneurs from all across the state could call and get access, get connected. We could be a conduit. We could connect them to the appropriate state organization or nonprofit resource partner, whether it be a chamber, economic development, small business development center, to give them the assistance they need. That's still in existence, goes on today. We've received over 70,000 calls or emails since we've started. The second marching order really, I think, speaks to this partnership. And we were given a small amount of money by the state, about $450,000. And then we get each year $2 million of an entrepreneurship tax credit that we have the chance to sell, market, whatever the right word is, in exchange for donations that lets us raise another $2.5 million that we are to pour back into loans and programs. And I'll mention that here in a second. So when the state gave us the 450 grand, we were chartered with creating a gap financing loan program. And so we did a max loan, 45 grand, had to be partnered with a bank or a public form of capital. We called it Startup Kansas, worked fine, was still in existence up till a couple years ago when we repurposed it because of some federal funds we received. The state of Kansas did, and we partnered with Commerce to deploy those. It kind of confused the market. So we discontinued and repurposed Startup Kansas. But that first year, Steve and I, the only two employees, we spent an awful lot of time sitting in our office getting loan applications from banks and other organizations across the state. And we would review them and approve them or deny them. Our board would play that loan committee role. It occurred to us, the notion occurred to us that when we were hired, we were both private sector guys coming into the public sector. When we were hired, the people that hired us used words like empower communities, partner with communities, engage with communities, and we weren't doing that at all. We were sitting in our office reviewing loan applications. So that's when this idea of entrepreneurship community, e-community, was born, 07-ish, was where we thought, let's take our greatest asset, which is our money, and let's partner with communities. Let's give them decision-making control over our money. We still own it. They get to decide what businesses to loan it to. It still has that same match with a bank or a public form of capital, but the community itself gets to decide how to loan our money out. They know the entrepreneurs better than we do. Let's push decision-making to the lowest level. And I don't mean low as in negative, I mean on the ground in the community. So e-community was born. But we treated it as an if-then partnership. If we're going to let a community have $150,000 or $200,000 of our capital, then we would like them to have a group of people that meet regularly to discuss the entrepreneurial environment, bring entrepreneurs to the table, talk about the goods, the bads, the needs, etc., and bring programming or technical assistance to the community to support businesses. And at the end of every year, we evaluate that marriage. We now have, as Jill mentioned, 75 communities. Now, I might mention real quickly, because you'll see two circles here in Douglas County. The statute that gives us our money said that we could work in both rural parts of Kansas or the urban core of the urban communities. Rural was easier for us to figure out. That's why we partnered with the Douglas County group, 2011 or 2012, and then with the Lawrence Urban Group in 2015. Just took us a little while to figure out how to engage in that market. But anyway, in each one of those 75 circles you see, every single year we evaluate the marriage. And if it is a good, strong two-way partnership, they're utilizing our capital. They're meeting regularly. One of our staff's present a lot of times, and we're stirring the pot in the community, then we allocate more of that gap financing next year. If it's not, we pull back. The money is our lever to try and affect partnerships and relationships. So the final thing I wanted to mention, that there's an awful lot of drawing, not a lot that I'll say except for this. We have 5 different loan programs at Network Kansas that we have oversight of. Some are funded with state funds. Some are funded with foundation funds, Kansas Health Foundation. The one on the far right is a byproduct of the state Small Business Credit Initiative that came out of the pandemic. Each state got an amount of money, population driven, to try and reinvigorate small business. Kansas Department of Commerce was the recipient. We partnered with them to deploy $70 million to small businesses across the state. We're, I don't know, 28, 29% of the way through it, but we're in the top 6 in terms of the entire nation in terms of deployment and transactions. Kansas, we're doing very, very well. And the reason I wanted to end with that slide is because I think it speaks very, very heavily to what we believe in before I hand this to Jill. We believe that gap financing is really a big part of what we do. And the entrepreneur should always start with the bank. And if the bank can and is able to provide all the capital the entrepreneur needs, they should. But in a well-functioning environment, if the bank knows that these funds are available, but not only that they're available, but why they're available. And that's not to compete with them, but it's to help them get a deal done that they can't because it's risky or there's not enough collateral or the numbers don't make sense. The bank brings the deal to the table. The local community has the ability to make the decision on it. And for all the reasons that I mentioned, the group that we've had the pleasure to work with here has been a fantastic partnership for a dozen years in the Douglas County partnership and going on 10 years with our Lawrence Urban Partnership. So I certainly will be happy to stand for questions at the end, but with that, I'll hand it to Jill. Thank you for this evening's time.
Commissioners, we did add one slide in here, and I won't spend a ton of time on here, but we can answer questions if need be. In the packet, we provided you all with a copy of the most recent loan dashboards. You can see what the total amount is for the e-community funds, but the funds that are on here, the Grow Kansas, the Kansas Community Investment Fund, the EDA Revolving Loan Fund, and the Multiplier, these are loan decisions so these are Douglas County loans that have been referred by one of our partners. So one of them that we wanted to make sure we called out was Wakarusa Valley Development is an organization that makes referrals to a lot of these programs. We know that we've had referrals from some of our food policy program partners as well. But these are programs that we make referrals to Network Kansas, and they're the ones that make the decisions on these particular loans. The e-community loans are the ones that our local financial review board makes those decisions on and ultimately makes recommendations of whether we're going to fund the loan or not. So just to frame up, what is the e-community? This is the best way that I could operationalize that with my partners. So Eric mentioned the Kansas Department of Commerce and the relationship that it has with Network Kansas. And then you can see that Douglas County and the Lawrence Chamber sit below Network Kansas because we are the host organizations for the e-communities. You're going to hear from my colleague at the Lawrence Chamber, Joshua Fallleaf, who is the e-community coordinator for the Lawrence Urban e-community. I serve as the e-community coordinator as part of my role of my other duties as assigned for Douglas County. Before I move out of Douglas County bubble, what I want to make sure I note there is that the food policy program and our food systems coordinator, Connie Fiorella Fitzpatrick, is a huge part of that, of how Douglas County shows up in the e-community. So then we have the FRB stands for the financial review boards that each of the two e-communities have to review loans that come before them. And then you see off to my left, Baldwin City, City of Eudora, City of Lecompton. Those are the cities that we work with to make referrals for the different loans and to direct entrepreneurs and entrepreneur support organizations to come be a part of the e-community. You also see organizations, of course, like the Baldwin Chamber, the Eudora Chamber, and all of these organizations that I'm mentioning, they are organizations that come to our bi-monthly. We have bi-monthly e-community meetings, but we have program committee meetings in between that. But on a bi-monthly basis, we have a really great table of folks that are sitting around and updating on the activities that they're tasked with, the things that we're doing collectively. And then let's see, Eric was talking about the role of banks. Mid-America Bank is an incredible partner in the Douglas County community. Josh was going to talk a little bit about some of the banking relationships that are specific to the Lawrence Urban and the Diversified Douglas County program. But when Eric talked about the risk that goes into some of these loans, Mid-America Bank is, as long as I've been the e-community coordinator, which has been, it'll be almost 9 years now, the only bank that has come to the table to provide that matching loan has been Mid-America Bank. And it truly, I think, is what I consider to be a holistic approach to working with folks. That organization is really embedded within the community in a lot of ways. So I just need to dote on them a little bit because it's real. And then you see the Douglas County Community Foundation. They are constantly listening in and trying to be a part of the initiatives that the e-community is a part of. They were a funder of our E3 Cities event that we had in 2024. Yeah. They provide some of the funding, but they're also trying to be thoughtful about the way that community foundations show up in providing sometimes entrepreneurs need some one-time support, a grant, not a loan. Sometimes they need a grant, and you see the community foundation thinking about that in new ways, along with other community foundations across the country and the state. And then the bubbles along the bottom are what we consider to be our ESOs, Entrepreneur Support Organizations. So if we say ESOs a lot, that's what we're talking about. Those 5 are the most prominent. That's the KUSBDC, the K-State Extension, CORE, Haskell Indian Nations University, and Baker University.
Jill, has KU Innovation Park been part of that ecosystem also in terms of, are they also a partner in that?
I don't want to say they aren't. I think that they haven't been a part of any of our specific meetings. I think I rely on, I think that the chamber probably has closer relationships with them. So I might let Joshua tackle that when he comes up and talks about the Lawrence Urban. Not so much for me though. But what I would say though is that, we have a really great group of folks that meet each month, every other month, and anybody that wants to come can come to our meetings. Table's open. So I want to talk about the specific, there are 3 bullets on the opening slide of what is an e-community. So the first one being a flourishing, sustainable entrepreneurial environment. So one of the things that I want to highlight that is the best example of that in recent years is the Entrepreneur Listening Project. So the Entrepreneur Listening Project is was the core output of the E3 Equitable Entrepreneurial Ecosystem Initiative that Forward Cities came to help us convene in this past year. And there was a community merge priority, and that was around the question of how we might foster an ecosystem culture that equitably centers and values entrepreneurial leaders of color. So this has been an important project for all of us, all the folks that have been involved in this initiative. And you've seen this slide, about 3 of our commissioners have seen this slide when we had the update from the Entrepreneur Listening Project closeout presentation with Faye Horwit from Forward Cities. But these are some of the key learnings that came out of that project. And we've got a great video that is on the Douglas County e-community initiative website if you're curious to see it. But I'm not going to read through all these, but yeah, some of these pictures on here are from that E3 tour that we did with local entrepreneurs that we engaged to be a part of coming to these key learnings. I don't know why it's not advancing. On track. Okay. Another example of the flourishing, sustainable entrepreneurial environment. That's the Youth Entrepreneurship Challenge we just wrapped up. These are two of our teams. The first place team is there on the left. And that is, their business was Don't Panic AI Tutors. And that is Daniel and Lawrence Dow, their brothers. One's in 7th grade and one's in 9th grade. And Lawrence Virtual School. And then you have Felix Kirkland, who took second place. He won first place the year before, and he's a freshman at Lawrence High School. And his business was Wedding Crushers. This is a really popular event, and we think this was the 6th year that we've hosted this. We've done it. We did it in person the first 2 years, and then we did it online a couple of times during COVID years. But sometimes in some years we've had up to 20 kids, but we had a small number of competitors this year. It's open to junior and senior high students. And so this is all of our folks that were with us on that day. And thanks to Network Kansas, we were able to give out $3,600 in cash prizes to those competitors. I would say $3,400 was funded by Network Kansas through the grant that we write to Network Kansas each year to get those funds. That's one of the huge value adds that we have in that partnership with Network Kansas. We had a $200 sponsorship from Silver Lake Bank, so I want to give them a shout out as our first sponsor for the YEC. But it's always a great event, and a big shout out to Peasley Tech for hosting. Okay, so I'm going to shift it to my colleague, Nicole Riles, to talk about the next example on engaging and developing entrepreneurial resources.
Good evening, commissioners. I'm glad to be here to talk a little more around how we are working to engage and continue the work of the Listening Project. So as Jill mentioned, the Entrepreneurial Listening Project was a great experience. It was a project that I was one of the co-leaders on. And one of the things that that developed out of that Entrepreneurial Listening Project is ways we wanted to keep that work going. And through our partnership with Network Kansas, and as Eric said, part of our mission through Network Kansas is to continue to be present in communities, feet on the ground, engaging, and letting communities really center the work that they want to do. So with that being said, last year, Network Kansas piloted a contracted liaison role where they were doing just that, having someone in the community, within the e-community, that was also connected with Network Kansas to help bridge the gap and start to really make entrepreneurs aware of the services that were available through Network Kansas, as well as through the wide e-community. So what started for me about 2.5 years ago, I believe now, going to a meeting, as I like to say, is where I am now. So this is a great example of just the organic kind of growth. I'm an entrepreneur and have been in this community for 25 plus years and done the full scope of working through organizations and executive leadership and management. And the last 4 years as an entrepreneur has been a really great experience for me. So joining into this project through that lens and learning more about the depth of things that are happening in Douglas County, collaborating and partnering with the chamber as a board member, the full scope has really kind of brought me to this point where I'm that person in the sense of entrepreneurs to help bridge and some of that gap and to help keep the work of the Listening Project moving forward as it pertains to entrepreneurs of color. So here is a few areas of the essential activities that I engage in. I think the two I really want to explore and make known is that what we are wanting to do is find a collaborative approach, a sustainable approach to have BIPOC representation with our support organizations, and through a method of collaboration, through a method of growth, and most importantly, something that is sustainable. So I am still talking to entrepreneurs, still listening, and will be formulating some sort of ongoing work group, for lack of a better word, really to keep those conversations going. But this will be different. It's more identifying a few entrepreneurs who like to do system level work. right? So who would like to be involved, come to the e-community meetings, work with me, work with Network Kansas, work with Jill to have these conversations around how do we keep that representation there for our BIPOC community members, and how do we grow? And how do we grow at a pace that is both collaborative and sustainable in long term? So our entrepreneurs understand that this work is here to stay. I would say, lastly, as Josh and the chamber will explain some of their programs and the loan programs, I'm also that person who tries to help as best I can, right? To make people aware of what those loan opportunities are, especially people who may not apply or who may not be aware of what it entails. So part of my role is to try to engage entrepreneurs and let them know about the e-community loans and the e-community support that's here. Thank you.
Okay, I was really hoping that my colleague, Connie Figueroa Fitzpatrick would be with us today, but she's not able to be with us. And she was going to cover this slide for us. But another example of how the e-community engages and develops entrepreneurial resources. This past year, the Douglas County Foodpreneurs Boot Camp was stood up through the leadership of the Douglas County Food Policy Council. I can give you a better view of some of the outcomes that are highlighted on that flyer that's there for the Online Restaurant Academy. But that was a partnership between Network Kansas, the Online Restaurant Academy, which is a separate entity that Network Kansas, I believe, initially spotted because it was such a compelling approach to engaging food entrepreneurs. And we could spend a whole other session just talking about that program. And I would love to have, if there's never ever an opportunity, I'd want that to happen with the Food Policy Council and some of the partners. So the partners I mentioned already are Network Kansas, which is a backbone supportive of this program so far, as well as the KU Small Business Development Center. They're a core partner to where this program is headed in the future. We learned in the initial year that in many ways, this is one of the best examples of how we are able to operationalize some of the things that we learned through the Entrepreneur Listening Project. This is an example of providing multilingual accessibility to Spanish-speaking community members, which were a big takeaway from the Entrepreneur Listening Project. Many of the participants were female entrepreneurs of color that participated in this initial cohort, and we're providing access to women and BIPOC entrepreneurs in a compelling way through the technical assistance that they have through this program. So there's a lot of hope on the part of the Food Policy Council and Connie in particular that we continue to play a role in this program, but it'll look a little different. But I just want to give a shout out to one of the things that we know for sure moving forward with this program from Network Kansas has agreed to pay for all the translation services for all the e-communities that are working with the Online Restaurant Academy program. So again, I just want to highlight that commitment. They're listening to what the entrepreneurs on the ground are saying. Okay, we're getting close to the end. So I want to talk specifically about what some of the activities that the Douglas County e-community has done, and then I'm going to hand it off to Josh. So we connect entrepreneurs to gap financing, technical assistance, and educational opportunities. You got in your packet a full dashboard, but overall, from 2011 to 2024, 40 loans have been dispersed, and you can see that some of those were featured on slide 5. 23 loans were paid off in full. A total of 1.4 million loans were funded, the average loan being $35,506. You can see the loan rate. I already talked about partnership with Mid-America Bank, but one thing I didn't talk about with Mid-America Bank is that they serve as the administrative agent for the loan. So when the loan payment comes in, they collect that loan payment and then they ship it off to Network Kansas each month. So they're making sure that we stay good on our keeping those loans paid in full. And then when there's challenges with any of those loans, we're hearing from Mid-America Bank about how we can leverage some of the services with the different ESOs, SBDC being one of the core components of those. We have SBDC built into the loan approval process. Before the Financial Review Board sees any of the loans to consider for approval, it's got to go through the KU Small Business Development Center. They meet with the individual. Sometimes they've been meeting with that individual already and they're already an active client, but they more or less get the blessing of the KU Small Business Development Center. And then that's something that the Financial Review Board member look at as they're evaluating it. And then I just highlighted some of the, in the last year, these are some of the loans that we made e-community loans to. Baldwin Veterinary Clinic, one of the things that they used for that loan was they bought a mobile unit. And I actually saw it driving by the other day. So they're taking veterinary services to people. And they have their storefront that is right, not on in downtown Baldwin, but in a vacant storefront that was vacant for a good amount of time. So it really was a nice investment opportunity. And then Baldwin City Made is a promotional products business. And then Prairie Psychiatric Care, just thinking back to our work session, that is a female-owned psychiatric care practice. And it's been a great process to get to know these entrepreneurs. And we know that the entrepreneurs, the way they get to us is largely through those partners that were on that big map that I gave you. All right. I'm going to let Josh talk about the Lawrence Urban e-community.
Hold this, I guess. Thank you for having me. I appreciate all the hard work Jill did to help put this together and to ask us to join them. And I don't know that I need to tell you, but I will anyway. The things that Miss Nicole Riles does in the work that she puts in on this is incredible. Not only does she have very successful and growing businesses herself, she wants others to do the same. So yeah, she deserves a lot of credit in this area as well. So what I want to briefly mention is there's no better name for Network Kansas than Network Kansas, because I've found them to be always interested in relationships and building relationships, both between the e-communities and themselves as an organization, but also between e-communities, Lawrence, Douglas County. But most recently, I won't say most recently, but what the pictures you see here is from our Empower pitch competition, which really, we were one of 4 of the urban e-communities, including KCK, Topeka, Manhattan, and ourselves, to do these pitch competitions. And those competitions were $15,000 each. So we had 3 winners winning $5,000 apiece, and getting to know those neighbors of ours who are all connected to Network Kansas and all working towards supporting entrepreneurs has been incredible in the network that it's created just on this I-70 kind of corridor. I'll also give one example of a business owner here locally who was saying, we have this storefront property over in Saline County. Do you know of somebody that I can work with over there? And I was like, well, let me call my e-community colleague over in Saline County and get you connected. And that was a great resource to have as well. And so the relationship that we've had in supporting entrepreneurs through Network Kansas and what they do has been very helpful, very beneficial, and have gotten people onto the next step. So I appreciate them. This Empower Pitch competition really was in response to needs that were expressed by the communities. And I would also add that as a feather in their cap. They respond to the needs of the communities. If the communities tell Network Kansas, here's what we need, here's what we're struggling, they respond. they work with their team, they work with the communities really, really well to respond to those needs. And so Empower as a program, has been very helpful for us here in the Lawrence urban community, as well as those in our neighborhood cities. So yeah, this has been the activity. Mid-America Bank, I'd have to second Jill's work there. We've worked with a few others, but Mid-America Bank really is a leader in that way. I'm going to try to skim. One of the things you've heard about, you're well aware of, is our Diversified Douglas County Loan Program to credit Network Kansas and their Empower. Diversified Douglas County was largely modeled on what they had already done and found some success in elsewhere. We utilized that. We had local entrepreneurs, BIPOC entrepreneurs, inform changes, adjustments, things that would be unique to our community and what is needed. So we responded, we listened, we adjusted, and we tweaked, and have had fairly good success in just 1 year. With 5 loans dispersed, we have 1 pending technical assistance. We don't want to put debt on that person without them having the tools they need, and that too, Network Kansas has proven to be a great leader in that. And to echo Jill's sentiment, KUSBDC is a certified program partner with Diversified Douglas County, and there's not many, if any, organizations who do what they do as well as they do for the people they serve. So I give a lot of credit to them as well. So we're really excited about it. Diversified Douglas County continues to get engaged in activities. Those 5 loans are really exciting because there couldn't be more different businesses than those that have come to our attention. And so we're really excited to be a part of that. This is Mr. Gavin Iowade, who is really, really young, ambitious, and just incredible of a young man. And he's got his own brand. He's branding his own clothes. He's out and about. He's got some tech savviness that I will never capture. But really excited with him. We do follow-ups, engagements, meetings. How are things going? What are you working on? What's the next step? What else can we maybe be helpful with? And so he continues to do well there. I wanted to go back and shout out these 2 young women. These were 2 of our 15 entrepreneurs who competed in that pitch competition. Miss Cute and Cut, her name is Chantel White, she had a terrific pitch, and she continues to operate, and you'll see her at events all over town. And then Lernice Lindsay is there on the right. She also served as an advisor to the Diversified Douglas County program. And those pictures, if you could see them, of her work catering events, those are pretty impressive as well. And so, yeah, things are going great. We look forward to a really exciting 2026 and all the things to come there. So be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Joshua, I got a question. Do you have any, Haskell's been on my mind a bit lately. Do you have any contacts or potential entrepreneurs over from there?
I don't have entrepreneurs, but I know there was Apache Collections, I believe is the name, over there kind of behind where Merck Co-op is, in that storefront. That's a native owned, selling native produced goods there in her store. She didn't need any of our resources. She was ready to go anyway. So if you'd like to go check it out, I'd highly encourage it. It's great work.
Commissioner Dorsey, if I may, I'll share that there are definitely some folks at Haskell University, specifically with their School of Business, and they also have an entrepreneurship associate's degree program, I think, some overlapping staff and faculty there. And there's 2 extension offices in Douglas County, one of them being the USDA Extension Office at Haskell's campus. So they've been a really active participant in e-community, kind of in all the ways. I don't know that any loan applications have necessarily been born out of some of those programs or students through this, but in terms of their participation in that larger ecosystem and having a lot more activity on their campus in the last 2 years, I'd say that's been a noticeable increase to me since they've had that extension office open up.
They also they got a grant from the USSBA, I think, to open a kind of an SBA office on campus. And I think that that's still moving forward. There's some wonkiness, there's a lot of wonkiness happening there. But before the more recent wonkiness, the timing of that center, an SBA on campus, being opened was being slowed down because it was the federal government giving money to another federal agency. But there's a lot of collaboration there.
Jill, I had a question for you. Joshua's slide had about $720,000. Yours was $1 million something. Was that primarily in the smaller cities like Baldwin and Eudora and Lecompton, and his mainly Lawrence? Is that roughly the split?
Joshua's programs are only in the city of Lawrence.
Okay.
And ours are everywhere outside. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Thanks. Yeah. I've heard a lot about the Baldwin projects. Are there others in Eudora?
I think that our partners are always looking, and that's why having relationships with the Eudora Chamber of Commerce, City of Eudora, Kevin Giroux, and her predecessor have historically always been really active members on the Douglas County e-community and on the Financial Review Board. And then I got to say, Mid-America Bank again, they're always trying to be thoughtful about serving the whole community. And we have had some really promising loans in Lecompton in the last couple of years. Empty Nesters Winery, Hill Creek Market. I might be forgetting another one.
Aunt Netters.
Aunt Netters. Oh my gosh. Aunt Netters is like one of the foundational ones. Ooh. Yeah.
Thanks.
Sure. Baldwin, and when you were talking about Haskell, this will be the last time I give a shout out to Network Kansas, but a couple of weeks ago, many of us were planning on attending the following week, the 3rd annual BIPOC Entrepreneurship Summit on the Haskell campus. And I was about to deliver a $5,000 sponsorship check from Network Kansas to support that event. And that Friday afternoon was when that leadership decided they needed to cancel the summit. And Network Kansas, said, we're going to hold on to that funding, but we're ready when they're ready to do that event again. And again, just a great nimble partner. And we're, just going to remain really optimistic and ready to help Haskell when they're ready.
I was just going to add, as far as I know, Mid-America Bank is opening or has opened a branch in Eudora. So we're really it's open now. Thank you. We're hoping that might help generate some more activity from there because they've been such a critical partner, and maybe they'll influence some other lenders along the way.
Thank you. I had another comment and thought, and those of you who know me, I only talk when I have something important to say, right? No, but the commissioner's question about Haskell really prompted me to elaborate a little bit more on, first, just to commend Jill and the county and the city, everyone who's doing this entrepreneurship work, but more specifically to just really encourage how we need to lean into this work. If you're paying attention, which we all are, the state of the BIPOC entrepreneurs right now is really important, right? We know there are statistics around the wage gap and what that looks like for people of color. And we are, one of the Connie says this often around the statistics also show that, you know, the quickest way out of poverty is through entrepreneurship. So we are doing generational work right now. You know, the listening session that we did, we talked to families who were trying to build their businesses for their kids, right? So it's work that pays off now, but more importantly, it's generational work, and it's really important in the climate that we are living in and the political climate that we are living in. I have my own story around what brought me into entrepreneurship, and it's not the typical story. It came through a hardship. It came through a place where I thought I was safe. And then I found myself needing to lean into something different. And that's one of the things that these programs are helping people understand. Like, what would that be for you? And whether it's now or 10 years or 15 years down the road, what is your skill? What is it that you do? And how do you make it into a business and move it beyond a hobby or a side hustle or something? So the work that we're doing is legacy work. It's generational work. We know that when we have a diverse number of entrepreneurs who are established and succeed in a county and a community, then that county and community benefits. We benefit from just the diversity of options that we have and the ability to just be culturally rich, as well as helping people succeed. So I just appreciate the work, and just really I really do encourage people to lean into this work within Douglas County. We have the opportunity to be that place, you know, and create that change that is going to be so important and vital to the livelihood of people around the world. So thank you.
My question is for Josh. Josh, can you talk about the two different loan programs and how one might be the right fit for somebody versus the other one?
You mean between
Diversified Douglas County and the e-community loan?
Well, the Diversified Douglas County doesn't require a bank match. So that bank match still goes through what Diversified Douglas County and its program and its impetus would perceive as systemic barriers to traditional capital lending. Diversified Douglas County credits people who are going to work hard with a good idea and are ready to go and need to get a foot in the door, need a start. That's where Diversified Douglas County comes in. The e-community is incredibly helpful in providing additional capital to get started that a bank can't necessarily collateralize. One of the things that make e-community funding very, very helpful is that it can be utilized for working capital, where not all the commercial lenders are going to be able to do that. And so it gives them a little more flexibility to make it through the first starting few months, if not longer, of their business. So it depends on one of the things I didn't highlight, but I think is really helpful in the 5 different programs through the Network Kansas, is a lot of folks just have different needs. And while it's been increased, it was 45 before, it's now at a $50,000 cap for the e-community. And for some, like several entrepreneurs I've assisted with, that wasn't enough to get them. They needed 60 or a little more. And so in conversation and working with Network Kansas, we were able to channel them towards a Grow Kansas loan. And so really it's not they fill different needs, each of those programs, and, you know, being able to have options to serve each of those entrepreneurs depending on those needs is helpful.
This question is for Jill and Josh. Like, do you set goals for how many loans you're getting out? I mean, is there a number that you're trying to achieve? How do you know that you're getting the reach that you hope for?
No, we've never done that. I don't think we've ever done that. I think we honestly, the work that we've done, we've talked a lot about the Entrepreneur Listening Project. And Josh just talked about, we know that one of the most significant barriers to entrepreneurs is having like flexible working capital. And that's where that, Diversified Douglas County, or if there are grants available, that one-time funding comes into play. So we have been trying, I think, over the last 3 or 4 years, frankly, since COVID, to better understand what are the barriers to even get to apply to an e-community loan. We know that a lot of the barriers are getting that matching, getting the loan from the private lender, having a down payment. How do you start from the base of what are the supports that the entrepreneur needs to get there? So that's a long way of saying, no, we don't. We're more thinking about the environment to help nurture folks to be ready to apply for them. But I also think, our partner at Network Kansas really compels us to be judicious in the loans that we do review. And having having the bank at the table is also doing a really strict review. And I feel like we have a pretty good financial review board that has a banker on it, we got a commissioner on there. We're scrutinizing them because we want to see the entrepreneur be successful. And I think we don't see as many as we'd like to in the last couple years, because there's a lot of risk and there's a lot of challenges. And I think building up the ecosystem is where most of our work has been, but we haven't set goals historically.
I would echo that. I think it's a balance between trying to set a mark and a goal of getting those dollars out versus doing it well. And so one of the great partnerships, I think maybe a year ago, working with Douglas County and Lawrence e-communities, we did a lender lunch and learn, and the Food Policy Council. And we had a great invitations out to bankers to just help them be more aware of the resource that Network Kansas can be to help them get to yes. If we're just short of where you need to be and it's between a yes and a no, can a Network Kansas program come in and get you there to help somebody get started? And so increasing awareness through programs like that Lender Lunch and Learn, I think would help to make sure that word's getting out. People know that this resource exists, and we can make sure to touch everybody who may need it. But I think to set a goal we haven't either. Well, I would say, we basically looked into some of the Empower programs. Are the only ones like what Diversified Douglas County is in the state, in neighboring communities, similar communities, and compare those numbers and those rates of loans going out and applications. And I'd say, all factors considered, we're going at a comparable rate to other communities based on populations and otherwise. So 5, while over the course of a year for a new program may seem small, it's really not. It's actually really, really good. And it's been busier more recently than when it started, and that's good, but also keeps us on our toes.
Yeah. You gotta come to the mic, Steve. Sorry.
Steve.
Sorry to interrupt, but I think what we've seen, Steve Kelly with the Chamber and EDC, we've seen quite a bit of step up. It's been about 1 approval a month. Our FRB's been pretty busy lately, and there's a pretty good pipeline. They come at different paces, but we've certainly seen an uptick in not only the interest, but also those that are getting to the point that we can actually have a review board review of them. And as Josh said, they've been varied in terms of the type of business, kind of what the interest and the need of the company is, but it has picked up significantly.
Commissioner Kelly, I would, sorry, I know not staff as making the presentation, but I do have a lot of thoughts about e-community. I've sort of asked myself or sort of wrestled with that similar question, especially I'd say in my first year on the e-community. Should there be what would be some sort of benchmark or measure of a goal met? And I think, for some of the reasons that were just discussed and the fact that all of it boils down ultimately to, a lot of factors in the economy that are not necessarily in anybody's control locally anyway. And so I have presumed that there's been a real fluctuation in both the applications for and processing of based on some of those factors. But what I have thought about and talked about a little bit in the past in some of our e-community meetings is trying to understand from the lender's perspective, how many people in a year or in a month's time are they discussing this option and opportunity with? And in that process of sussing out, is this a right fit or not quite right yet? How are they sort of delineating that? Is there any sort of data that would be helpful for us to digest about, so they were able to successfully help 5 businesses apply for the same type of loan program. But did they talk to 20 people about it? And what were some of the issues or gaps or sort of just lack of criteria that existed for those other 15? And I think that there have been some stories that maybe we know of anecdotally where one year they weren't quite ready yet, but because they built a relationship, that the following year, a couple years later, things are different about their business, circumstances have changed, they've been able to come back and access that funding in a different time. But it feels hard to pin down, I suppose, trends in that, but I've been curious myself, like what's the reason that a bank is saying, no, this isn't quite right now, and what does that tell us about other gaps and opportunities in our larger local economy that could maybe be addressed elsewhere to help make it so that 10 out of those 20 applicants or potential applicants next year sort of get the green light, go, let's push the application all the way through. Because I think there's just a lot of information that on the e-community side, especially the Financial Review Board, we're missing a lot about what that totality of interest and need looks like, because only a few are making it through to us. So I just offer that for whatever it's worth.
Yeah, I just make a bit of a comment. I mean, Jill's time and the investment we make in our chamber, I think are economic development levers that we're trying to pull. If we don't have any measure of whether we're making a difference, I think that's my challenge, is like, how are we making it? It may not be the number of loans, that might not be the right measure, but I do think we need to do a better job of actually quantifying what it is we're doing when it comes to development. If this is the way we're growing our commercial and industrial tax base, what does action look like? And it feels a little bit in some ways like we've opened a gym, and if people show up, that's awesome. But how do we make sure we're getting enough visitors to that gym and tracking their regular basis? So I appreciate all the work that's done. It is really great, but part of my job, I feel like, is to keep pressing for more, especially on the economic development side, when we hear so often that we need to increase our tax base. And my big belief is that entrepreneurship is a strong way to do that work.
A very good point. And I will say, I also think there's something to be said for us doing, especially looking at this dashboard of the, I'm used to looking at just sort of the more current time, but seeing, the totality of time is to try and look back and figure out, can we identify what the tax impact of that has been? What have those businesses been able to contribute? How many of them remain in Douglas County, regardless of whether their loans paid off or not? I think that's one piece of it.
I would say I really got a kick out of looking through the businesses in the dashboard, and so many of them that I know and that I frequent and that I care about. Both of those programs, but certainly the Douglas County one, I could name very many of these businesses. So I thought that was exciting, and that does show a long-term impact that not all of these businesses have been able to stay and thrive, but many of them have and are really important. Important contact pieces in our small communities. So Baldwin certainly very well represented. Lecompton is well represented. I think there's certainly room to grow in Eudora, but I really appreciated kind of getting to go back and see like, well, how long ago was that business getting started or making a change and taking out that loan and paying off that loan. So I spent quite a bit of time looking through those, and thank you.
We'll open this up for public comment. This is a regular agenda item. Does anyone here like to provide public comment on this item? Anyone online, sir? All right. Any further comments, commissioners? This is not an action item. Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Eric. And thank you, Steve. Appreciate your time and all your work. All right, we'll move on to our last agenda item for tonight, which is a mid-session update from Little Government Relations. And I see Stuart making his way to the lectern, podium. Lectern, are there school settings? We'll have staff dig into the difference between a lectern and a podium. Jake?
Good evening. Do you want me to?
Okay, give me just a second.
Sure.
There you go. Okay, better. All yours. Just toggle through with the arrow.
Thank you. Good evening. I believe this is only the second time that we've been here since the new commissioners were sworn in. You've met Mallory Lutz from our office, and I work with Mallory, and you have the misfortune of dealing with me tonight instead of Mallory. So I'm going to run through and give a brief update of where we are at this point in the legislative session, and happy to answer any questions. So please feel free to interrupt me as you want, or however that works. We have just crossed the midpoint of the 2025 legislative session. We've sped up the legislative process a great deal. We're about a month ahead of where we normally have been. The process has been changed. We've compressed the time down that there are for hearings. We have a much quicker turnaround time in the process, and that's presenting some challenges. As I'm sure Jill and Sarah and Sean would be able to tell you, the issues and bills that are coming up are very fast, and we have almost no time to make decisions about whether to testify. And those of you that work in other areas that may deal with legislative stuff, this has been a bit like no other session, and it is challenging to the point of, in some ways, not really as accessible as it should be to be engaged in some of the conversations going on in Topeka, and we'll see how that works going forward. This is the first time we've tried this, and we'll see how that works. We are, however, in the second half of the session, which means a lot of bills are dead. There's only about, I think, 16 days left for any committee work, and then they're going to be on the floor and gone. So we are moving very quickly. The other point I would note that has some impact as well is that, as you may recall, we began a new budget process this year. Historically, for at least 50, 60 years, the governor submits a budget when the legislature comes to town, and then they begin to work from that budget. This year in the fall, the legislature decided they wanted to create their own budget, and essentially like a baseline flat budget, start the legislative session with that and begin looking at enhancement requests that that state agencies offered. What that meant was when the governor presented their budget the first week of the session, that was not the budget from which we began. That was the governor's recommendations were the equivalent of anybody else's recommendations about what ought to go into the budget. And so instead of starting from the governor's budget, we start from a budget without any of the governor's recommendations. And so everything's in a process. That budget also has only passed through and had hearings in the House. The Senate has not had subcommittee meetings, met, talked about budgets until yesterday. And the Senate Ways and Means Committee, they are not going to have subcommittee meetings so folks can come in and ask about for enhancements and those kind of things. So that process is completely different as well. It's been a very different, challenging year. And legislatively, I just kind of reference in general, there's been a lot of legislation, some of this mimicking some federal level stuff that's going on, but some attempts to kind of tighten, and particularly in the healthcare world and in public education, not so much, strangely, in local government work very much, but put more controls and oversights over what's going on. So I want to go ahead and jump to, these are probably some of the highlighted bills that are making their way through, and I'll talk briefly about these and happy to answer any questions. There's a bill on fast track permitting. This was part of the building industry's effort during the interim committee last year to say the housing crisis in some ways is related to local governments being slow and permitting new construction. There was a big, broad bill that did a whole bunch of things to rush the process. It's been narrowed down at this point to industrial permitting is taken out because of all the other requirements, and it's now just focused down to residential permitting. And within a 60-day from the application, there has to be a yes or a no. This bill has passed the House. It's going to be in the Senate. Some version of this is going to pass. There is a bill that is back for the third or fourth year called No Impact Home-Based Businesses. This has been an ongoing attempt to open up the ability outside of other zoning and traffic and those kinds of things, the capacity and the ability for home-based businesses. What that means is very broad and kind of undefined, and there's some sense that it could be everything from an Airbnb to a data center to whatever one might have within your home. And so there's some language in there about having to follow traffic flow, but you don't have to have sprinklers. You can have separate buildings on your property to do that. And you don't have to have a lot of those safety requirements are waived. So that has passed the House as well. There's a bill that we've been watching with regard to the public funds, for public entities, local governments, public education, the use of the public funds that you have for to put them in interest-bearing accounts as you're holding those, and to which generates some significant revenue at certain points. And for schools and for local units of government, there was an effort by financial institutions to really kind of drastically change that process and change the interest rates at which they would be able to bid on public funds, which is essentially would have provided a pretty much a required usage of and I'm no expert on this, so I'm about at the limits of how I can describe this, but putting the ability for a bank to essentially get first option, even if there was a better interest rate available. That bill came up. There were 3 weeks of negotiations, and then just this morning at the financial institutions, and a lot of good work done by Kansas Association of Counties, League of Municipalities working together. They've come to an agreement. None of us have seen the words, but today in the committee it was described that preferred interest rate set for financial institutions would not be part of the bill. There'll be some changes done to the collateral pool and other issues, but the biggest risk of significant loss of revenue from public funds, and that proposal even included adding to bonds as part of that process. So the impact of that, particularly for school districts that are doing big bond issues. So that should be resolved. We'll see how it plays out. there are a couple of bills that I think are picking up on some federal issues, and one of them is Senate Bill 254, and another one, Senate Bill 196. 196 is requiring E-Verify to make sure that undocumented non-citizens are essentially either go through the E-Verify process or they can't be employed. And then Senate Bill 254 restricts public benefits for any undocumented non-citizens in the state. And that means any kind of public benefit from state government, local government, or public entity or public agencies, which is kind of undefined. So is that a charitable organization that has some public funds to be able to use? They would not be able to make those funds available to anyone who was not documented. And that bill has a hearing next Thursday, tomorrow, not next Thursday, tomorrow. And it will be, it may be one of those bills that's so large it kind of collapses under the breadth of what it's trying to do, but it's becoming part of a continuing part of the conversation that we're having now in the legislature. There is a bill, next one, Senate Bill 178, which is a bill that started early in the session that would require all law enforcement organizations to cooperate with ICE on their activities that they would undertake in the state of Kansas. That bill, the sheriff's associations came out in opposition to that bill. The hearing was pulled. The bill sat there. The bill has appeared again for another hearing next week. So that topic's going to come back up again. The couple of, I know we've always followed along with housing issues. There's one of the limited number of things that the state does for housing is a affordable housing tax credit program that, and this tells you kind of how the session's going. The bill abolished the affordable tax credit. No one testified in favor of the bill. 40 people, organizations, entities testified in opposition to the bill, and it passed the House and it's gone to the Senate. So there is some discussion about whether that bill will advance in the Senate. There may be some solutions that would come up. I think some people were kind of taken aback at the fact that a bill made it through with nobody asking for it. And there will likely be some discussion about essentially not eliminating that, but putting a cap on it, reducing the cap or something to keep it in place. I know an issue's been Capers 3 as an employer issue. There's only been one bill that would have moved teachers from Capers 3 to Capers 2, reaping those better benefits. And that bill cost over $400 million and it didn't go anywhere. And there's one Capers bill that makes some adjustments to folks in Capers 3 attempting to increase their benefits over the course of time. Last thing I would maybe mention off this list is of the motor vehicle fees bill that we, along with other counties, were interested in seeing increase to cover costs. And I think it's still at like 75 cents or something. And there's a bill to try to get that passed. The bill has been blessed so it can be used after turnaround. So it's still alive. We'll see how it goes. And there's not much of an appetite for raising fees or taxes with the legislature at this point. Property tax, I would note, we started the session talking a lot about property tax very quickly. There was a Senate proposal that would cap assessed valuation increases at 3%. It passed the Senate. The House is not going to do anything with that. The House has a constitutional amendment that will establish a 6-year rolling average of appraisals to mitigate the ups and downs of appraised valuation. And that bill is going to be debated in House Tax tomorrow, and it will probably come out of House Tax and it'll get on the floor sometime next week. And that probably, if there's going to be something for what the state can control in property tax levels, that'll be that bill probably as we get further along. I would only note one other thing. I put 2 things on this slide, and I've already talked about 254. We've been engaged in some work on your behalf with the county administrator's office with regard to World Cup and just kind of where we stand in the process with the state. the state has invested in a couple of different phases, $28 million for that's going to, what's it called, World Cup 2026 in the Kansas City region. And as here in Douglas County and in Wyandotte County, there are 2 locations that may be selected as home bases, if that's the terminology for an international team coming. We've been engaged in conversations with policymakers about making sure that some of those resources come here. I know there's been a lot of time and energy invested in the administrator's office with that. And there's going to be a briefing tomorrow in the House Appropriations Committee. And we've met with the members of the committee and the chair of the committee. And we're going to have some more conversation about that to make sure that those resources that were supposed to be broadly spread are coming to us as well. I'm happy to answer any questions. There's a tremendous number of bills out there. I can answer about some of them that I have in my head, but it's that one of that time of year, so.
Thank you, Stuart. Commissioners, do you have questions?
I had a question about that investment
Yes.
income bill. I think it was number 3 on your list.
Right.
Can you explain that a little better?
I can explain it more. I don't know if I can do it better, but I'll put it to you this way. Essentially, the financial institutions put into a bill a proposal that would allow them to bid on public funds at 0.5% over the PMIB rate. And if they could do that, and if they did that, a public entity had to take that bid. And I can get you a more detailed written explanation, but essentially gave them a rate that may have been found lower in other places, but it locked a governmental entity into having to award them the funds.
Today, the PMIB rate is 4.33. So they're saying if it was 50 points higher, like 4.83, they would have to give the money to a bank.
Right. And the idea was public funds in general are invested in a lot of different places in different ways. The financial institutions were saying we need to keep more of those resources home, so they're invested in local banks. The reality is many of them get farmed out to entities so they can around the country. So it's a very complex issue, but you're right. That's exactly what the structure was supposed to be. So, yep. Thank you for helping me explain that. I really do appreciate that.
I appreciated you mentioning like how the accessibility has been different this session and then previously. It's been my experience also. Just everything feels more hectic. And people can't keep their schedules because they're being brought into other hearings, and it's just been really hard to engage with our representatives there at the State House with the schedule that they're keeping this time around.
It will be interesting, and I do appreciate people living in the building. I feel it all the time, so it's nice to know that it's out there otherwise, but members are not necessarily wildly happy about it either, because it's been very significant change in how they're managing their own committees as well. So.
Yeah, I didn't mean to reflect that it was, their fault with it, in terms of individual members. I think they're wanting to keep those appointments and wanting to meet with people and have constituents come to their offices, and they just can't because of how the schedules are being managed.
Exactly.
SB 79, SNAP, sugary food ban. It passed the Senate. Next steps?
There's a whole laundry list. In our written report, there's an entire laundry list of and this gets back to kind of my opening comment about attempts to kind of exert some control over how things are being managed. But that is one part of the process, so that SNAP benefits would not be able to be used for soda and candy, but apparently what's candy and what's sugar is very, it's a mess, or candy and food is very complicated. But it is, I don't know that it's going to go anywhere, but it's part of a very broad effort to put more oversight over those kinds of programs. So one example of that is there's a bill that's making its way through that currently in the Attorney General's office, there's an Inspector General for Medicaid fraud. There's a bill that would expand that role and add about 20 investigators to investigate any public assistance, whether it's SNAP, WIC, housing, any of those kinds of things, would all have a division within the Attorney General's office to investigate all of those things as well. So it's part of a broad, the sugary stuff's one example of several different things that are taking place.
Just going to pause after that one and breathe for a second on what it's really about. House Bill 2377, and in your notes, this is the one about sales tax and the mill levy. I think this is at the top of page 4, Stuart.
Okay.
And one that just drew my eye was the impact will vary county by county. And I read through it and I don't understand it.
All right.
And can you help at all with that and maybe how it would impact Douglas County?
This is a bill that came from an individual in Sedgwick County, county commissioner, who wanted to recast how the sales tax was distributed. And this is the way, okay, how to distribute sales tax revenue. And rather than distributing the sales tax based on, it would be based on your valuations, not necessarily related to the taxes that you levied. And so, for example, and this came out in the hearing yesterday, in Sedgwick County, and I only say this because it was part of what was discussed, Derby loses like $700,000 simply because of their valuation, and Goddard, which is almost kind of the same, but has different valuations, gained $100,000. And so once they kind of mapped out changing how you distributed that, they were like, this doesn't necessarily make any sense. The bill's not going anywhere. But it's one of those things you had to have a hearing on where everyone kind of realized this is maybe an idea that didn't need to make it all the way to a bill.
Good, we don't need to discuss it anymore. Thank you.
Sometimes I hesitate to bring these things up. But and I don't think you mentioned it in here, or I just missed it. Maybe I won't even bring up that specific bill. Can you talk about any efforts that you're aware of related to preemption specifically? So preemption of, the one that I'm aware of is legislators trying to preempt any potential for programming around universal or general basic income. And I cannot remember the bill number. I thought I had a note about it on my computer, but I'm not finding it quick enough. And which maybe means no news is good news. And it just sort of died after the hearing that I listened to, or the committee meeting I listened to. But I'm just curious if you have tracked, in addition to that, any other the preemption of local control. I mean, I know you have a local control section in here. Are there any others that you would highlight?
Well, unfortunately, I'll have to break the news to you that, that bill is moving forward, and it disallows, prohibits local entities from investing any public funds into anything that would serve as some kind of universal income. There's a new bill that just came out that is going to be dealing with, it's called the Squatters' Rights Act. It's going to be a policy and procedure in place in terms of dealing with folks that are may or may not be squatting, and trying to articulate what that means and how that process might go. Gosh, what was there? There's something else that's in my head and I don't have it right yet, but I'll think about that if I remember. I'll email.
Thanks. And as I'm talking about it, I found where you mentioned it in here and I see that it's moving forward. Thanks for the update.
Any other questions, commissioners? Okay, let's check if there's anyone who'd like to provide public comment on this issue. Thank you, Stuart. Anyone? Anyone online, Sarah? Okay. This is an information only item. We don't vote on this, commissioners. Any other comments you'd like to make?
I do appreciate the thoroughness here. There was a lot to read through and a lot to process. So I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, Stuart, always appreciate your work knowing that as things change rapidly, we have you as a resource over in Topeka. So thank you very much. I'm sure this time has been stressful for you and your team. So thank you. That wraps up our agenda, commissioners. I do not think we have any appointments tonight.
No, I'm still working on some. I'll have some for you next week.
Okay. Unless commissioners had ones in their pockets they're not sharing. Okay. And then do we have miscellaneous? We typically start off with Sarah's memo that is attached.
Yep. Commissioners, my memo's in the packet related to what Stuart mentioned related to little government relations work on FIFA 2026. There's an update in your packet on that. For you all. And just a reminder that tomorrow night is our annual township meeting at 5 o'clock at Public Works. Hopefully we get a nice crowd of township officials to attend. So for those that'll be there, I'll see you there. And just some upcoming agenda items on the agenda. That's all I've got for you, commissioners.
Commissioners, any miscellaneous items? I will share, first of all, Commissioner Willie and I attended the employee luncheon yesterday, and I want to congratulate Sarah and Jake for some very good highlights put together there, and the HR team for all their organization. It was really nice to recognize the number of Douglas County employees for their work that they do for our community. It was really great. Also, I want to invite commissioners tomorrow. I know it's short notice, 2 o'clock out at Peasley Tech. Justice Matters, for those of you who have attended their assembly, has been working on some things with training certified nurse aides and elder care. And we're pretty excited to have an assigned agreement between Workforce One, our new workforce entity for our region, and Dwyer, and they'll kick that off. I'll make some very short remarks, but really thank you to that team that really found Dwyer and is bringing that resource not only to our county, but 17 counties in Kansas. So that's pretty exciting. And that's at 2 o'clock tomorrow. If you're able to attend, you're certainly welcome to.
I am available to attend that. So for noticing that.
Okay. So there's.
You email it to me?
Yep. I think yep. And I'll also share that Commissioner Reed and I have started working on the letter that we talked about last week. Sarah forwarded me some information. Thanks for those who are able to attend. That was Fridays, right? Fridays information. And then Commissioner Dorsey, I think, continued to attend some other meetings. So we'll blend that in to that letter. Commissioner Dorsey, do you have a bit of an update?
Well, I went to a meeting on Sunday of me and 14 other people at Thad Holcomb's house. He's trying to organize a group to address some of the issues brought up by the Haskell terminations. And coincidentally, not out of that meeting, but the foundation has requested $350,000 from the public to help some of the people who have been terminated. At the meeting I went to, there were a bunch of retired professors who said they would be happy to come out and teach classes, but to teach at Haskell, you have to pass a federal background check, which costs $500. And since probably the people that do the background checks have been fired, it might take months and months to be approved, so that didn't seem to work. And the group divided up into subcommittees, and we're meeting again this Sunday. I've gathered information on where to do press releases to, and so I think the group will put out a press release. I gave you the first draft of what they had come up with. I kind of object to the word racist because I don't think the action was taken as a racist act. It was taken as a numbers act. Let's get rid of X number of people, but Haskell got hit to the tune of about 30%. The Polytechnical Institute in New Mexico lost 40% of their employees in what I would call the Valentine Massacre, but we're still working on it, and we think there'll be a general public meeting again a week from Saturday or Sunday at the Presbyterian Church again. And that last meeting we had over 200 people at. So that's kind of where we stand on that.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other miscellaneous items?
I suppose I'm remembering that I'll share that I'm headed to DC this weekend for the NACO Legislative Conference. So hopefully we'll have some interesting or enlightening things to share in a week's time.
Thank you, Commissioner Reed. We do have 5 meetings in April. Sarah asked us to let her know about what we think about 5 meetings in April. If there's a date, do we have a date that's sort of we're coalescing around yet, Sarah?
As our standard practice, if there are 5 Wednesdays in a month, we generally cancel one. The only thought I had was the last weekend in April is right around the time the chamber is organizing their legislative fly-in trip. And I think Commissioner Willie and Commissioner Anderson are interested in attending. That might just give them a little extra time. But other than that, I do have work sessions scheduled for the other ones. So but I can always move those around.
So the dates for that fly-in are that Monday through the Wednesday. So it would be perhaps a flight would allow folks to be here for a Wednesday meeting, but it would be tricky. So I would say that the 30th of April would be the one to skip if
I would lean towards that as well.
Okay.
Yeah. If that's okay with commissioners.
Yeah,
Great.
Sarah, did you have a chance to talk to staff yet about more time on the agendas?
Still working on it.
Okay.
Okay, so we're canceling the 30th
Mhm.
is our plan because that's the 5th Wednesday. Okay. Anything else, commissioners?
I had one other item I might bring up. I had a meeting with the treasurer today, and we talked about interest rates and some of these issues that are before the legislature. And I think as part of the revised finance policy, the Treasury investment policy needs to be part of that redo. And corollary to that, I would like to see some way to get more money reinvested with the banks in Douglas County. Much of it, as Stuart said, is going to anywhere where you can get the best interest rate. We have deposits all over the country currently, and I would just like to see Douglas County banks be able to bid on those things. They may not win the bid, but it would be nice if we would invite them to bid.
Might be helpful to know how many banks are actually owned here in Douglas County.
22.
I think it's one,
Yeah, I
possibly
think it's
2.
one's actually owned here. We may have 22 different banks.
Well, there's 22 branches in the county. Mid-America, I would think, might be the only locally owned.
Hmm.
True. if we go into looking at investments, we might have to look at statutes about whether that comes under our purview or the treasurer.
Well, the statute says you have to beat this rate to bid, and then the statutes say you should bid with local banks first. That's 12-1677B and 12-1675.
Okay. Anything else, commissioners? All right, we are adjourned.